So again, good morning. I'd like to thank Chris for the kind invitation to do this. I'd like to thank the governor for putting this on, and I'd like to thank Gold-Rat Consulting, some of their members who I have a history with that goes back over a decade. And so thank you very much. The purpose of what I'm going to do today is to talk about leadership and continuous improvement. The leadership part is the focus, but as I go through my presentation, I need to set the stage for some of the areas in which continuous improvement and the theory of constraints principles that are going to get talked about in this conference were very important to the successes that the organizations that I led were able to deliver. I believe in what we are talking about for these 2 days. Every success that I have enjoyed as a senior officer in the military is rooted in the principles of continuous improvement, theory of constraints thinking, because it has a transformative effect on organizations. And the term breakthrough results is not just a bumper sticker, it is what we can actually achieve when we think in these ways and when we collaborate along with using these principles. So the first thing I would tell you is that I was a senior executive in the Air Force and the Department of Defense, so I worked outside of the Air Force. And I did that for 12 years. So of my 38-year career, I want to talk about 12 years. Of the 5 assignments I had, 4 were in key leadership positions. So I'm using very generic terms. Senior executive key leadership positions. In the Air Force, we call them generals. In business, you might call them an executive VP. Depending on the size of the business, you could be a CEO or a COO. I'll tell you that the continuous improvement culture was central to every performance breakthrough that I was able to achieve. And it transformed the organizations that I was part of, and it is still doing that. I wasn't the only one that brought this stuff to the fight. A lot of other people were doing it as well, and it's very important thinking. One other interesting thing about our business that a lot of people don't know is that our job tenures are capped at 2 to 3 years. We have an up or out system. We need to move on and go to the next job. And so we show up at a job. We have to quickly determine what our predecessor did that we wanted to keep. And then we have to decide what we want to do that is different. And then we have to go fight for the resources to accomplish it. That sounds very similar to what you are doing, whether you're in local government business or you're in private business for yourself. But that's the environment that I would work with. And then these are profit and loss businesses. I operate to produce a product, and for me that was the availability, the operational availability of weapon systems. And our customers were obviously the warfighters. And during the years that I'm talking about, 2005 to 2017, we have been heavily involved in Iraq, we've been heavily involved in Afghanistan. We see an emerging China, a resurgent Russia, evolving and metastasizing threats across the world that cause us to have a very strong operational focus. So let me tell these two vignettes before I get to the point of what Chris had asked me to do, and that is to talk about leadership lessons. So of the 4 executive VP or senior executive jobs that I had, the first one that I had was an aircraft maintenance, repair, and overhaul, or an aircraft overhaul function, where we had 7,500 people. And there were about 10 to 15% of those people that were involved in a product line calling C5 Strategic Airlift. And to set the stage for people that don't know what the C5 is, the C5 is the largest strategic airlift asset that the United States has. We only have 112 of them. The first group was manufactured in the 70s. The second group was manufactured in the 80s. So they're getting kind of old, even in 2005 when all of this is going on. And I'll tell you that from a demand signal perspective, the need for these 112 airplanes back in 2005 to 2006 was incredibly high. At the time, President Bush said we need to surge in Iraq, and all of the things that needed to flow there were going to go ship, which takes a long time, or by air, which is quicker, but there's a very narrow constraint, throughput for us to be able to use those aircraft. So I told you we had 112 of these. These aircraft are on a 7-year cycle, so every 7 years they need to come into our depot. We were taking almost 1 year to do the overhaul on these aircraft. Our work in process was anywhere from 10 to 16. So we had between 10 and 15% of our nation's largest strategic airlift asset tied up in an overhaul process that we were taking a year to do. What we wound up doing was implementing a critical chain project management approach to streamline this process. And so if you look at what we did and what the team did at that time in evaluating our as-is state, all of the words that I'm going to use are the words that come out of the Gold Rat books that all of us read in school or have been advised to read as we think about this. Our employees were multitasked. We had them running all over the place, and they were working off of time cards or work cards that were very inflated in terms of the time standard that we expected them to accomplish the work in. We were storming aircraft that were closer to their delivery date than those that might have had work that was ready to go. We had, because of that 7-year time frame, we were bringing in a lot of work in process, so we had a lot of airplanes on the ramp that we just couldn't do very much with, but we continued to apply people to because we can't let an airplane sit. You know, we have to throw people against it. And the net result of all of that dysfunction was that we were taking 340 days to produce an airplane that had some suspect quality issues that went with it. When we moved into critical chain project management, we did several things. And there are things that are just right out of the books. We went with the actual task times. We built a network and a computer system or in a software system that was very helpful to us so that we managed the buffer, the flow day buffer as a common pool, and we tried to accomplish tasks on time and on the critical path. We also looked at and did things that were very unusual, and that is when an airplane would come in and we would take the struts off and the flight control surfaces and the engines and the pylons, take all the paint off of it, the floorboards and the cockpits, and we would send all of those parts out to the repair shops. We would actually do something that we had never done before and is counterintuitive to our thinking. We would leave it alone. We would just walk away from it because in the background all of those parts were getting worked on. So let me talk just a little bit about the results. So the results were pretty dramatic. We had a 40% cut in our work in process, and we wound up reducing our overhaul flow days from 340 down to 160. The net effect of that was that we returned to the warfighter for their use during whatever operation we were supporting an additional 8 aircraft, almost a squadron of aircraft we gave back to them because we weren't holding on to them for that long. The other thing that we did, the other things that we did that helped our enterprise is we freed up dock space for additional work, because as you can imagine, a hangar that would hold the largest aircraft that we own, to build new ones of those are very expensive. We had new workload we needed to bring in for a different airframe, and so that helped us out a lot. And we also provided a rebate to our customers. We said, you know what, we've been charging you based on these inflated or buffered task times, and we're finding we're accomplishing them in much less, and the net effect is that we're giving you your airplane in 160 days. So the second vignette that I wanted to share with you before I close this out is to talk about another kind of business that I worked in my succeeding assignment, and that is supply chain management. So in the supply chain management world, there is an activity that provides parts for all the services, Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines. And so I left the Air Force and I went to this joint organization, and my responsibility was to be the manager for supply chain management for DoD aviation spare parts. And so DoD meaning the Department of Defense. And so that's there are about 1 million parts in the portfolio. It's about a $3 billion spend per year. It's a lot of parts. It's a lot of businesses that we work with, and a real challenge. So I had been in this organization 10 years prior. I thought I knew. I was pretty confident. I thought I knew what I was doing. I was going to show up there, and I didn't need no stinking new ideas because I thought that I just had it all down. So that's not exactly the way it worked. In the years preceding my arrival, the organization, the parent company in this case, had just gone through the conversion to the Department of Defense's largest enterprise business system. We had an SAP system that runs exceptionally well, demand planning modules on the front end that help us with our customer forecasting, all of the supply chain language that I think is common to commercial industry. I said, okay, well, near as I can tell, that's just going to be a box of software that we start running on our computers, and everything's going to be the same. What I didn't realize was that in the 5 years prior to my arrival, all of the job descriptions had been changed, all of the people were called different things and had different titles, all the organizational structure was different, and most of the terminology was completely different. And so what I had to do was walk in, grab the paper bags again, start breathing in them to say, okay, how are you going to get through this one? So there were certain fundamental things about the business, though, that were the same. The mission of my organization was to be a contract writing machine. So if you think of any factory, the input to the product that I work on were purchase requests, which are essentially the customer telling us they need a part, or the statistical forecasting models telling us to buy something. And so that generates a process that goes through engineering, cost and pricing, legal, small business, and ultimately winds up with a buyer for an award, and then we go through post-award and we work through the contractors. All of that stuff was very basic, but the people doing it and the terminology being used was completely foreign to me. The other thing that was happening was that the backlog at the front gate, the amount of material coming in, was growing like this. So the PR backlog that we had was somewhere between 10 and 15, grew to almost 10 or 15 months worth of work that was sitting there waiting for our process to award these contracts so that we could get this material to the warfighter. So we were in a very difficult situation. Again, breathing in the bag, I knew this was not something that I could change or get out of. I knew this was the environment that I had to live in. So I did what I thought was the right thing, and I called those same guys that had helped us out at the C5 base. And I said, I got a problem. And this is just like out of the Gold Rat books. You know, my epiphany moment came over Christmas when no one was around and I had time to finally think after 6 months. And I'm going, I got to call somebody from help, and I got to talk to somebody about what it is that I can do differently in this process. So the approach that was recommended to me from both our Gold Rat consultant that we used and also the core team that we had put together to help in this process was to come up with a drum buffer rope application. In the interest of time, I can't go into it very much other than just to tell you that when I was faced with customers' back orders that were up 78% and the backlog purchase requests that were up 72%, I had to do something different. And so the drum buffer rope production control system started to do the things that focused us on priorities, and they also focused us on how much work was released onto the floor. And that was very, very important to getting people awarding contracts to their priorities and to meeting and to also optimizing our constraint. So what came out of that was a significant increase in our throughput, so that by the first year, which would have been the end of my tenure, our late awards had been reduced by 22% and our throughput had been increased by 19%.